Hi, I'm Brian Miller. I know that the world can work for everyone, but that it won't until it works for you. I've created this to help you make the difference you were born to make. It's a series of conversations with thought leaders who are moving humanity forward. And in each episode, I explore their lives and the work they do. I also ask them to break down how they've gotten their books written, published, and read. This podcast is all about exploring the magic and mystery, and sometimes the misery, of the creative process. So if you have a mission, a message, and the motivation to share it, this podcast is for you. Welcome to the School for Good Living. Hello, my friends. Today, my guest is... I have a hard time with this last name sometimes. Hold on. How do you pronounce Raghunathan? Here's a little video. You need a 55-second video to tell me that? What? All right, skip ahead. There.
Hi, everyone. Greetings on this channel. Now I will talk about how to pronounce this word. So let's get right to the it. Raghunathan.
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 I will repeat more slowly.
I love that. Hello, my friends. Today, my guest is Raj Raghunathan, a professor of marketing at the McCombs School of Business at the University of Texas at Austin. Whew, that's a mouthful. He is also the author of If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Happy? And he is the author behind one of the most popular, massively open online courses ever created, a course on Coursera called A Life of Happiness and Fulfillment that has been participated in by more than 250,000 students. It's available to you online at no cost right now. Raj explains consumption behavior through themes from psychology, behavioral science, decision theory, and marketing. He talks to the smart and successful. That's who he's writing for. People who have already accomplished a lot, people who are intelligent, but maybe don't yet experience the level of happiness that they want, or they don't experience it as easily and as often as they'd like. We go deep on the topic of gratitude, something that can be trite, feel like something on a hallmark card, but Raj gets into the how and why it works, why it matters, and how we can use it more effectively. We also talk a little bit about a Hindu concept called Leela, the concept of life as a cosmic play. Raj talks about leading a healthy lifestyle as the foundation for happiness. In the final part of the interview, he talks a little bit about procrastination, how to overcome it, and how to overcome inertia that might keep you stuck. So I think you'll find something that you can implement into your life and your creative endeavors in this wide-ranging conversation with Raj Raghunathan. Raj Raghunathan. Raj, welcome to the School for Good Living podcast.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Honored to be here.
So, Raj, what's life about?
Okay, that's a very broad question. And I don't know if I have the answer to it, but I do think that you stop thinking about that question in a way that disturbs you if you find out what your purpose in life is. Okay, in a sense, what you're asking me is what's the purpose of life? And I don't know what that is, but if you find your purpose in life, and the way to find that out is to have experiences that this researcher called Csikszentmihalyi called flow states, flow experiences, where you get so immersed in an activity that you forget, you lose track of time, and perhaps even forget yourself, lose the sense of self-consciousness. If you know your purpose in life, then you stop asking that question in a way that's frenzied and feverish and desperate. But you might ask the question out of curiosity, perhaps.
Yeah. I've lived a lot of years frenzied and fevered and desperate, and I think some people might tell you that I still do. It's not totally up to me, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. You don't look it right now, but...
Well, thank you. When you meet someone, and I realize this question, the answer to this question might change depending on context, situation to situation, who you meet, where you are, whether you're speaking or not. But when people ask who you are and what you do, how do you like to answer that question?
So I go with what I might call a conventional answer, which is I just tell them my name, I tell them my designation or position at the university where I'm a professor, and which department I belong to. So as you know, I'm in the marketing department, but I teach a class on happiness. I don't quite get into that, because that then raises a whole new set of questions. What really? I mean, business school teaching happiness, how come? And so on. So I just give them a conventional answer. But it's interesting that you asked me this question, because in the back of my mind, almost always when I ask this question of somebody and when somebody asks me this question, there is this element of, who am I really? I mean, other than this idea of having an identity with a name, with a certain role to play, who am I, kind of a thing. So I don't let that distract me too much, because I'm assuming that they're coming at it from a conventional angle, and I just give them the conventional answer.
So if you were ever in a situation where you might share with someone an unconventional answer to that question, what might that look like?
Yeah, so that's something that I don't have a whole lot of clarity on. I just think that this fact that there is anything at all, and that we have such a thing as life, and that we are floating around on this piece of rock around a big ball of fire, and that we don't kind of, freak out. Well, maybe freak out is the wrong word, but I mean, just step back and say, what the hell is going on? I mean, why are we here?
Yeah.
The fact that we don't seem to get caught up in that as often as I think we should is sometimes a little bit surprising to me, that, people just go about their life. And, I find myself also getting caught up in, just regular life. So if you were to ask me from that perspective of, deep down, or, when you step back from your roles, what is the answer to the question of who am I, or who are you? How would you introduce yourself, etc.? Then I would say that right now, I would say that my preferred position, although I don't have any proof for it, I feel a little tacky referring to this word called consciousness, but, I'll still say it. But it seems that what I feel quite confident about is that I can see things, I can perceive things. It seems that this thing called I exists, this ability to perceive, etc., obviously assumes that there is something that is able to perceive and observe. So that thing seems to exist. And I am also somehow right now not wedded, but I mean, I think I believe that this thing that is perceiving, I'm calling that thing consciousness, is something that has been around and is not going to die when this body dies. And so there's going to be a kind of a continuation of this deep down reality of who I am. And, how I got to believing this, I can talk about it later, but that's what I would say I am, that I'm consciousness, so are you, and we're all, in existence, and we've always been, and we always will be, but just temporarily we have occupied this vessel called the body, and see things in this narrow, limited way. And once this body perishes and you die, quote unquote, die, that's when is one of the moments of truth, when you realize that you are consciousness that always existed, that will continue to exist. But then might come another cycle of birth and so on. So in a sense, I guess I would reveal that I'm a subscriber to reincarnation to that answer.
I think I share your perspective as I hear you articulate it. And part of what I love about your book, If You're So Smart, Why Aren't You Happy?, which I want to ask you about in just a moment, is knowing that that's kind of the worldview that underpins, what you share. I love wicked smart people. And when we met, I had the sense that you were one. And now reading your book and seeing, not only are you incredibly intelligent, I believe, but also you're very studious. You're very researched in looking at this topic of happiness. And, one of the questions I thought to ask is, why did the world need another book on happiness? Which maybe I'll ask you that. But before I even go there, let me just ask you, if you will you share this book? Why, who did you write it for, and what did you want it to do for them?
To the question, who did I write it for? I would say that I wrote it for people who are the kinds of people that I hang around with because of my role, because of my job. As I mentioned, I'm a professor in the marketing department in a business school. So I'm surrounded by very smart, very ambitious people who are already successful. Many of them are bound for a lot of success, like my MBA students and undergrads. But I also know that they're probably not going to be as happy as they think they're going to be, given what they're going to achieve. I think their assumption is that, if I do all these things, then I'm going to surely be very happy. But I know that that's probably not what's going to happen. They're going to be just as happy as the average person, maybe even somewhat unhappy because they've acquired a bunch of traits and worldviews and aspirations that undercut their happiness. And so that's whom the book is written for.
How do you know that? Like, I mean, is this personal experience? Is this other research? How could you be so sure and then be confident that this book could help address and resolve that issue?
Okay. So I thought your question was, how can I be so confident that they're headed for not so much happiness?
Yeah. That's right.
So that part of it, actually, there's quite a bit of research on, in the area of happiness, on the relationship between life's external circumstances, like the amount of money you make and fame and power and wealth and success and who you marry and so on, and your happiness levels. And it turns out that all that together perhaps accounts for about 10, maybe 15% of your happiness. Okay. So it's not a big amount. And yet, if you look at people and if they're unhappy and if you ask them, okay, so what are you going to do? Most of them pin their hopes on external circumstances and trying to improve those circumstances, get a better job or get more money or get more famous or whatever. And they really think that that's going to make them happy. And there are reasons we can get into why those are not sustainable sources of happiness a little bit later on, maybe. But the second part of your question is, why am I so confident that my book is going to help them? Tell you the truth, when I wrote the book, I wasn't so confident because, you have to first be conceptually clear about the things that the research has documented as improving people's happiness levels, and you've got to kind of believe that, and that takes a lot of work. It's a new field. Positive psychology is a new field, and so we're still kind of replicating a lot of the results, and who knows if many of these results are still going to hold maybe 50 years from now. It looks like they might, and they will, but there is that element of it. And then comes the tougher part, which is that even if conceptually all these things that we know or we are finding increases your happiness, even if conceptually we have confidence in them, people actually have to use them and apply them. And we know that, often that's where we have a lot of failings. If out of 100 people who make a New Year's Eve resolution, maybe about 15% stick with it, right? So even if you know what to do, will you have the ability to actually do it, right? So when I wrote it, it was more that I wanted to put these ideas out there for this group of people that, in a sense, the happiness, literature tends to ignore, in the sense that we tend to think that, okay, let's address the depression of the really sad people, or let's address the kind of unhappiness of really poor people. And of course, that's very, very important, right? But nobody really talks about the unhappiness of really rich and famous people, because they think that they already have all these things. They're probably happy, so why should they be even happier, right? So I felt that this group, the happiness of this group was important to me. And so I wanted to kind of write the book to them.
I think you refer to this group as the SNS, the smart and successful.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Which, it makes me think about something a friend of mine talked to me about. She was actually the first guest on my podcast, a really beautiful spirit named Lynn Twist, who wrote a book, The Soul of Money. Mm. And she shared in this book, was the first time I heard this, and she's since talked with me more about it, but she talked about when she was young going to Calcutta to find Mother Teresa and wanting to serve with her there. And she finally, she waited her turn and she met Mother Teresa, and Mother Teresa actually, she listened to her story and heard what her motives were and all this. And Mother Teresa actually said, go home to the United States where the rich have their own form of poverty, but it's a spiritual poverty, and your work is there. And so it's like, who's going to turn down a directive from Mother Teresa, right? And she spent her lifetime now doing that as a philanthropist and a teacher and a humanitarian. And so one of the things that I like about your book is, I think you're right that the wealthy have their own form of suffering, but it's not, my experience is it's not the easiest thing to talk about, because it's like, cry me a freaking river, this kind of thing. But as you point out, once we have our basic needs met, after that, a corresponding increase in wealth or status does not bring a corresponding increase in happiness. And your book starts to open up some things that are truly useful.
Yeah. I agree. And, it's done quite well. It's been translated into 13 languages. And now that the book has been out for a couple of years, and my course has been out for even longer, for 3 years, I know that it is coming in handy, and many people around the world are finding it useful. So, if you maybe start out with 100 people, maybe in the end only about 5 people actually kind of see a big uptick in their happiness levels, because out of 100 people who buy the book, maybe 50 actually read it, and then maybe 20 actually do something with it, and then maybe only about 5 actually sustain it over a long period of time for it to have an effect. But I'm happy that it's 5 is better than 0, right?
Yeah, yeah. Well, and it was very resonant with me as well, because as an undergrad, when I finished my degree in English and in Asian studies and worked inside our family business for a few years before I thought, I got to be missing something about business. I didn't have this background in finance or accounting or marketing or whatever. And I thought, I'm going to go back to school and get an MBA, even though, business wasn't alluring enough to me to make it my undergrad. And my dad actually counseled me against it. He's like, just do what I did. He was a college dropout. And he said, just roll up your sleeves and go to work, have a great attitude. And he's like, that's what I did. And I got it. But, of course, I'm so smart. I didn't listen. I got a year into an MBA program and I was miserable. I hated it, not only because of the subject, I think, but partly because I didn't really feel like I connected with the other students who I saw as there to get a degree that would help them get a good job or maybe develop this powerful network of people and earn a lot of money. And what I saw was like, in a way, I'm blessed to already have those things or to have a certainty of those things just by virtue of, the family I'm a part of. And so with that, I thought, I know that working like this, climbing this ladder, what's that saying about before you climb the ladder of success, make sure it's leaning against the correct wall? And so in a way, part of my work and why I'm grateful to have this conversation with you today is because, having watched my dad die at 64 years old, largely from overwork. He built something really phenomenal before he passed, but he paid a very high price in his spirituality, his health, his relationships. And I could see, although he did die at peace, and I'm grateful for that, part of what I see is I want to get up at the top of that wall people are trying to climb and say, like, enjoy the climb, like, look around, like,
Yeah.
It's not so great. It's not so great here. And I don't mean to say like I'm all high and mighty or something, but that's obviously you've devoted your life to a similar kind of message.
Yeah. And I think that it's incredible. From my vantage point, what you're doing and what you've done is so unique that really, hats off to you. Because most of the people in your position would have found it very difficult to be able to kind of resist the seductive power of the kinds of things that you were called upon to do. Conventional people would have looked at it and said, I can't give up this. I have to build and then make it, 100 times this and so on and so forth. But for you to kind of step outside of that, in a sense, you're like the Buddha, right? Like you were born a prince and ended up saying, no, I'm interested in why there is suffering in the world. And I want to get at the root cause of it. And that's really incredible.
Well, no, thank you. So I want to ask you about the structure of your book, because again, it's easy to talk about some of these things as concepts, happiness as concepts. But before we even get to the structure, I want, if you will, to talk a little bit about the Jeannie exercise that you invite students or others you speak to do as it relates to happiness, and what's so interesting about that.
The interesting thing about the Jeannie exercise, actually, before I talk about the interesting thing about it, let me just mention what it is, right? Because some viewers may not be aware of what it is. So I call it actually the Jeannie question. And the Jeannie question goes like this. Imagine that a genie, similar to the one in Aladdin's story, appears in front of you and grants you 3 wishes. What 3 wishes would you make? And then I have people list their wishes. And then I look at the wishes and, aggregate them across different categories. It turns out that, around the world, 50% of the wishes, give or take, have to do with money or things related to money, more, bigger house and, materialistic things. And then another good 20-25% have to do with success and, the accoutrements of success, that you get recognized or you're powerful, you're in control and so on and so forth. And very, very few people, only about 5 to 6% of the people actually ask for happiness. Right. And then I turn around to these people who have not asked for happiness. It's not number 1, number 2, or number 3 on their wish list. And I ask them, hey, you have all these things, what about happiness? Isn't happiness important for you? And the first response I typically get is, yeah, it is very important. In fact, it's the most important thing. But these things will lead me to happiness. Then I turn around and ask them, well, if happiness is what you ultimately want, why not ask for it directly? Why do you want to ask for something that is going to lead you to happiness? I mean, it's like saying, okay, I want to get to Delhi from New York. Let me get a ticket to London, because it happens to fall on the way to
Yeah.
Delhi. Why not get a ticket to Delhi, right? Then they come around and they say, no. I mean, I really don't think that I could be happy unless I have this. So then I ask them, how do you know that? What makes you so convinced that you have to have money to be happy? What makes you so convinced that you have to have power and success and all that to be happy? And so it starts kind of like, peeling the layers of the onion, this exercise. Then I ask a separate group of people the same question, but then I remind them that, look, I've told you that the genie is all powerful, all knowing. You can ask for anything, including happiness. And then suddenly the proportion of people who ask for happiness actually shoots up. Okay, so the genie exercise reveals to me that people actually do want to be happy, do think that that's the most important thing, but they forget all about it as they're going about their daily life. And why does that happen? I think that happens because we get distracted by other things. We get distracted by power. We get distracted by money. We get distracted by fame and all these extrinsic things. And that in turn makes us commit what I call the fundamental happiness error or fundamental happiness paradox, which is that although happiness is most important to us, as you observe people going about their daily lives, they often sacrifice happiness for the sake of other things like power and money and fame and all these extrinsic things. And that's kind of sad because, we know what we want, we have the clarity about it if we were to kind of step back and think about it. But then at the same time, I think due to social conditioning and observing other people chasing all these things, I think at some level, that's a more powerful message that seeps into our system that routinely kind of, trips us up and derails us from prioritizing what is actually more important to us. So that's, in a nutshell, the genie exercise. Yeah.
If you ask someone, would you rather be successful and unhappy or unsuccessful and happy, which of course is a false paradox, right? Because but I think in a way, this question about just why not ask for happiness, it occurs for people. It's funny because if you say like, what weighs more, a pound of feathers or a pound of bowling balls? And they're like, well, of course it's a pound of bowling balls, right? But it's the same. And I think people it doesn't occur for us in this way. But your book starts to open up some of this insight. So that's where now I want to ask you about the structure, because it would be one thing. I mean, you could have written this book in a lot of different ways. You could have just written it as a collection of like great thoughts, or you could have presented it as a really academic tome, or it could have been there is a lot of personal stories in it, which makes it very readable. I enjoyed learning. I think your writing is very funny in many places. But why? Will you tell us a little bit about how you've structured it and why?
Yeah, so part of the structuring is because of the target audience that I mentioned some time back. These are successful, smart people and, the MBA type. And because did you end up finishing your MBA?
I did not. No.
Okay. All right. But you probably know what I'm talking about. The MBA type, they want key takeaways.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, end of every class, they want, okay, here are the 7 things that you need to retain. I know that you learned that we talked about today. Key takeaways are very, very important, right? And so I knew that was going to be the mindset of the smart and successful people. So I wanted to kind of give them a framework to hang all the concepts around. If I talked about gratitude, if I talked about compassion, if I talked about the need for mastery, mindfulness, and so on, but as separate concepts, I thought that maybe the chances that people would retain these would be less, and the chances that people would think that this is of value would be less because of the type of people they are. So I came up with this framework, which, as you know, I call it the 7-7-7 framework. Basically, I talk about 7 deadly happiness sins that we commit, the 7 habits of the highly happy, and the 7 exercises that mitigate these sins and nurture these habits. Okay. So I thought that, the 7-7-7 and also using the 7 sins, which is kind of like, because of religious, messages. It's a kind of a phrase that people are familiar with. 7 habits, maybe because of Stephen Covey, people are familiar with. So I wanted to kind of piggyback on some of those things as a marketing ploy too. So it is that thinking that led me to that structure.
Yeah. No, and I love it because it kind of looks at it from every perspective. Here's what people do. And then there were times that I'm like, oh my gosh, I think, I do that sometimes. And here's a way out. It's not just like pointing out, a certain thought, pattern that I've been running or something like that. Like you talked about, I love the thing you said about, I think you called it maximizing, I want to say maximizing minimums, but I don't know if that's right.
No, the maximizer mindset.
The maximizer mindset.
Yeah, or medium maximization.
Medium maximization. That's it. So I get focused on what is the means to an end, and not, and it's kind of like the happiness thing you talked about, the Jeannie thing. But I do that. Will you talk? Because that to me, I think that falls into one of the 7 sins.
Right. So actually, the first sin is deprioritizing happiness, right, or sacrificing happiness for the sake of other things. And one of the reasons why we do it is because of media maximization. So media maximization is an explanation for why people get distracted away from happiness, which they deep down know is what they want to kind of ultimately want out of life, and end up pursuing the means to happiness and maximizing the means or maximizing the medium. By the way, that's not my term. It's a term that occurred in a paper that one of the people that I respect a lot, his name is Chris Shee, H-S-E-E. Chris Shee, he's a professor at University of Chicago. So in one of his papers, they use that term media maximization. Okay, so I think the best way to explain media maximization is to think about the most prevalent medium, right, which is money. Now, when it comes to money, if you don't have a lot of money, obviously some money is going to help, right? I mean, if you're living below the poverty line, getting money is going to help you meet your basic needs and get food on the table and so on. It's definitely very, very good to pursue money at that point. And if you're somebody at that point, then, you're going to discover that money makes your life better. Money makes you happier, right? And so you're starting to associate money with happiness. And what happens, though, is that, you grow to, let's say, earning about $100,000 a year as a household. Let's say, 4 people, you're the breadwinner for the family and you're earning that much. At that point, everyone's basic needs are being met. More money is not necessarily going to make you, meet your basic needs more. And it turns out that after that point, the relationship between how much money you have and how happy you're going to be, it kind of starts diminishing and perhaps even kind of plateauing it out. And in some cases, even going down a little bit. Okay. But because in your early experiences, more money did make you happier, you're kind of like deep down in the subconscious recesses of your brain, this association between more money and more happiness is so strongly entrenched that you can't help but chase money, more money, more. Even if it's making you less happy, you can't kind of stop yourself from doing it. And that is medium maximization. That's maximizing what ought to be the medium, forgetting the end. You ought to be maximizing the end, but you're stuck maximizing the medium. That's one of the ways in which you get distracted away from happiness and into prioritizing other things.
And when you point out that, beyond basic needs, happiness really isn't that complicated, right? But maybe one of those things that's simple, not easy, maybe. But you talk about these 3 things about great social relationships, a sense of purpose, and a quote, positive attitude toward life.
Yeah.
What's your view on that today? Because you wrote this book a few years ago, and you did the Coursera course, and I'm sure there's things that you've learned since then, which I want to know about. But is it really that simple? Does it really boil down, once the basic needs are met, to great social relationships, having a sense of purpose, and maintaining a positive attitude? Could it be that easy?
I think it is actually that easy. But like you said, it may be simple, but not easy. Maybe that's what I should say, that I do think that it's that simple, but perhaps not that easy. And what makes it particularly complicated is that, the relationship part, I think most of us get, okay? And most of us have ample opportunity for it. And, even if you've not been raised in a particularly loving family, I think that you kind of intuitively get that having relationships is important. And I think we all have opportunities for that. Then comes the kind of, I call it mastery. So having a sense of, okay, this is my field. This is where I want to be good at. You're obviously good at conducting podcasts and interviews. And, I'm good at my own gig. Everyone's got their own gig. And so that too, I think there's not much complication. I think it's the attitude part that's really tough. It's one thing to say that, have a great attitude towards your life, have a positive attitude, look at the positive side of things, be resilient, be optimistic, have hope. And another thing entirely to actually be able to mimic those characteristics, particularly when, things are going badly for you, right? When things take a turn towards the south, to be able to kind of, be resilient, be optimistic. that's tough. And I think a big reason for that is that we are surrounded by a lot of negative messages oftentimes. If you look at the news, for example, there's a lot of negativity there, right? And if you look at what your boss tells you or what your peers might tell you if you fail at a task, again, there's a very good chance that it's negative. And the fact that we're also leading pretty frenetically paced lives where there's so much going on, and I don't think technology is helping us. Although on paper it ought to, right? It's just giving us a lot of information without helping us figure out which is important and which is not, and how to kind of wade through all that. So I think that in the end we are stuck in a place where we feel that we have a lot of potential, a lot of opportunities, and we ought to be leading happier lives than our ancestors did. We have look how much going for us, and yet the reality is that we don't experience that goodness, feeling of centeredness, harmony welling up from inside of us. If anything, we feel fragmented, we feel unhinged, we feel frenzied. There's a term that one of the authors of a HBR, Harvard Business Review article, uses: attention deficit trait. Attention deficit trait. It's like ADD, the traits of ADD, but it's not something that's genetic. It's due to the environment. You feel frenzied, you feel impatient, you feel irritable, you feel like there's too many balls up in the air and you can't handle all of it. Very, very common phenomenon. I was just talking about this concept with my MBAs and undergrads, and I just, through a show of hands, asked people, how many of you guys have ADT right now? And like 80% of the hands went up, right?
Like not just like in general, but you're like in this moment.
Yeah. So you can see that it's maybe simple. In the end, this is all we need really to be happy. It's like coming home, right? You circle all around the world looking for these golden keys, and they were always there in your house.
The classic story, right? And the hero's journey, and always returning home. I have this theory. I'm not even sure it's fully formed enough to deserve to be called a theory, but you talked about technology just a moment ago, and in your book you use these terms: time scarcity, time abundance, this kind of thing. And so my theory is that we are creating tools, obviously in the form of technology, that are helping us to see aspects of ourselves, right? So that we can become more fully formed, or whatever you might say, more complete as beings. And some of these, while they seem to encourage us to further fragment our attention or to, intensify the sense of hurry, the hurry sickness that maybe our culture has, like all this kind of thing. At the same time, what I wonder is, were those things always there, and now the tools and the situations we create in which to use them just become the clearings in which that becomes evident? I know that's a very conceptual thought, but just to take it one step further and then attempt to turn it into a question is, if that makes any sense to you, and if you see it at all that way, what's like one of the things that's been totally transformational for me was to realize or come to believe that I can feel any emotion in any moment. It's possible. Now, the situation and environment and all of that might not be conducive to feeling something like peace or, centeredness or whatever, but it's available. So then what that implies is not only greater awareness, but greater mastery, right? Greater responsibility over that. But do you find that people who experience greater levels of happiness are more conscious and more responsible in shaping their response to the situations? Or is there a certain trait, or are we just, kind of subject to whatever life throws at us, and, we're happy in a certain time and place doing a certain thing, or we're not? That was a really unwieldy question.
I think there were like 2 or 3 parts to it, right? I think you began with this idea that maybe we have within us the potential to be frenzied and distracted, and the availability of technology is just allowing that potential to come out, rather than really instilling in us things that didn't exist.
Yeah, it's not creating it; it's merely exposing it.
Exposing it, yeah. I think that is the first part, and then you went on to talking a little bit about this idea that to be totally happy and to be able to sustain it, isn't it true that you got to be aware that you have options available for you to respond to events that are happening to you, and that you're not kind of chained or you're not constrained by the external circumstances and what life throws at you, that you have a choice and you have some flexibility, right? I mean, those are two things that I...
If you want to just conduct the rest of the interview, I'll take it from here. That's great. You're doing great.
No, I just want to make sure that those were the...
Yeah. That's it.
Right? So I don't know if you want me to talk about the first one or the second one.
I'm just wondering what you see in either one of those things, and specifically how it relates to what we can do or maybe not do to, the people listening to experience greater levels of happiness more easily. Yeah.
So certainly when it comes to the second part of your question, this idea that you have to develop, in the literature, they talk about this as response flexibility, right? The idea that, you are going to encounter events, stimulation that provoke some kind of reaction from you. And you have the choice of either going with your conditioned reflexive responses, many of which are hardwired and even more of which are socialized into you, or at some point comes a milestone where you step back and say, look, I mean, this is not the only way in which I can respond to this particular event. And I can acquire new arrows in my quiver, so to speak. I can expand my repertoire of how I respond to this. And that is certainly a big milestone in anybody who's become very good at taking personal responsibility for their own happiness. You can't, in other words, be good at maintaining equanimity and happiness on a sustained basis unless you've come to this milestone of recognizing that, look, I'm not a prisoner of the events that happen to me, okay, in terms of my emotions. I definitely have a choice here. And that's part of the reason what makes this simple and not so easy, right? I mean, it's one thing to say this in concept, and I think many people would recognize the truth of it. But what are the set of practices that enable me to acquire that response flexibility? And secondly, how do I put those habits or practices into operation, and how do I kind of actually do them, right? So if you think about mindfulness, for example, as a practice, there's a lot of evidence showing that mindfulness allows for that response flexibility to blossom. And so it's one of the kind of more reliable means of developing that response flexibility. But it's kind of difficult to figure out exactly how to practice mindfulness. And we are kind of in a very, very interesting age right now because of the availability of some technology that actually enables us to practice this better. I don't know if you've come across something called Muse. These are headbands.
Yeah.
Measure your brain waves and stuff like that.
I haven't used it, but I've seen it online. Have you used it?
Yeah, I've used it. I like it. I mean, I still use it.
What benefits do you get from it?
It's biofeedback, right? So if you put it on and then, the typical session is to kind of focus on your breath. And if you're unable to focus on your breath, then you hear kind of thunder and, stuff like that. And the storm kind of a thing.
That's much better than the negative self-talk I would hear otherwise. So, yeah.
And if you're able to focus on your breath, then you hear birds chirping and the winds kind of calm down. So it's telling you in real time that you're doing well or you're not doing well. Oftentimes it's difficult to figure that out because it's all internal, right? If you're riding a bicycle, if you've fallen or not. But if your aim is to focus on your breath, what does it even mean to focus on your breath? What does that consist of? So I think that you get this feedback through Muse. Anyway, so back to your question. So that's very, very important, right? I mean, it's super important to recognize that you have flexibility. And then it's important to recognize what are the set of ways in which I can develop that flexibility, and even more important to actually practice those things so that you gain that ability over time.
That makes so much sense to me. And slowing down and cultivating greater awareness. I mean, it seems, at least in my current line of research, is that this is what it keeps coming back to. Maybe there are other ways, but this one is pretty reliable. And, although there's probably not a one size fits all, there's not one app, one teacher, one mindfulness technique. The practice of mindfulness is what is common. And one thing I want to be sure to ask, because I think it's relevant at this point in the conversation, is you talk in this book a little bit about the concept of mental chatter.
Mm-hmm.
And and it wasn't only within the last year, I think, that someone suggested to me, something I read suggested to me, that it's possible to be addicted to thinking, which had never occurred to me. But I think prior to that awareness, I was. Now, I probably still am, right? But when I saw your concept of mental chatter, that definitely came up for me, and especially what you found about what percentage of our mental chatter we think is negative versus what probably really is. Will you talk a little bit about what mental chatter is and what you've learned about it?
Sure. Yeah. So the term mental chatter I actually first encountered through another gentleman. His name is Sri Kumar Rao. I sat in on one of his classes and he brought this up. And basically, you can think of mental chatter as the kind of static noise in the background of your mind that's constantly active. It's commenting, judging, just kind of, there's a running commentary that it's giving about everything that's happening to you, right?
I hate that guy. Always evaluating, assessing, opining, judging, right? Always.
Yeah. And most people never really, I think most people are aware that there is such a thing as mental chatter. They are aware that there's a voice in the back of the head, but they've not really spent much time thinking about, okay, what's the emotional tenor of this mental chatter? What's he saying? And is it positive? Is it negative? So,
don't lose your thought, but I want to jump in there for a moment. I'm actually surprised that there are people that don't know that, right? Like I remember a couple years ago, I was in a large workshop, one of these LGATs, the Large Group Awareness Training, and the facilitator invited us to start to pay attention to that voice. And there was a lady in the group who gasped audibly when she discovered there had been a little narrator along for her, whatever, she was probably 50 years old. And kind of similarly, not to out my wife's secrets or anything, but she told me that the book that helped awaken her to that was Eckhart Tolle, A New Earth. And she's like, I remember where I was when I read it. I remember the impact it had to have this awareness. So I don't remember learning when I had one. It just seems like, I always kind of knew it. But I think there's still a surprising number of people that they're not aware that that's there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it might depend on what is called in the research as how self-aware versus self-opaque you are. And some of us are just more introspective and are aware of these things, and other people not so much,
Yeah. So I didn't mean to derail you there, but if you'll please keep going. So
yeah. So in this exercise, what we ask people to do is to kind of like tune into that mental chatter and then just write down whatever that mental chatter, the content of that mental chatter is. And often people are ask me, okay, how exactly do I tune in? So, for example, if I feel like I'm going to go to the gym now, do I write down, I feel like I'm going to go to the gym? I say, no, that's your goal. That's your conscious thought. You got to kind of tune into what's going on behind that conscious thought. Okay, maybe behind the conscious thought is, I really don't want to go to the gym. I don't feel like I'm going to have a good session. I'm really tired. I should be going to go to sleep. That's the thought. That's the thought that's underlying the conscious plan of going to go to the gym. Anyway, so it turns out one of the good ways to tune into your mental chatter is to actually sit down to do a meditation session, So when you're trying not to kind of really think about anything in particular, that's when the mental chatter kind of becomes a little louder. Anyway, so I ask people to write this down, and my colleagues and I have done this across different groups of people, including students and retirees and so on. And people are very surprised. Okay, so before I ask them to do this, I ask them to indicate, okay, let's say there are 100 mental chatter thoughts. What proportion of them are going to be positive and what proportion negative? And I forget the exact data now, but people generally predict over 60% to be positive. Okay, maybe 70% to be positive. But then later on, when they actually do this exercise for a couple of weeks and come back, and then they look at the kind of overall number of thoughts they have in the proportions, it turns out it's exactly the opposite. There's many more negative thoughts than there are positive thoughts. And those negative thoughts fall into these buckets, of thoughts about relationships, thoughts about feeling inadequate or incompetent at work, and thoughts about not having enough control and certainty about how life is unfolding. Yeah.
Is your experience or your belief that we can actually shift the kind of fundamental nature of our mental chatter? Like, is it, with affirmations or by, consciously mapping out our values and, having that as a belief, or just putting ourselves in certain environments, surrounding ourselves with positive, uplifting people? I mean, will these things have a lasting effect on changing our mental chatter, do you think, or is this some innate kind of survival instinct that persists?
I don't think there's any doubt that we do have something called negativity dominance, right? So there are 10 things that happen in the environment, and 9 of those are positive and 1 is negative. Let's say you make a presentation, somebody comes to me later after the blog is up, and 9 of them say good things and 1 of them says bad things. I'm going to remember the bad thing more, okay? That's going to have a bigger impact on me. It's going to leave behind a bigger psychological scar, whatever you want to call it. That I think is genetic. And, there are some scholars who've talked about why that might be. Back in the day when we had to survive lots of dangers out there in the real world, you had to focus on the dangers in order to survive. And we are the progenies of those who survived. They are the ones who made the babies. Okay, so we have a hardwiring that is prone to negativity. But what's also true is that we can train our mind to focus on positives. Okay. And some people here at this point would ask me this question, okay, but is that a wrong thing to do? Because if adaptation has taught us to be negative, isn't it a good thing for us to continue to be negative? Then I tell them that, look, I mean, back in the day, for sure, if you're still surviving or fighting for survival, go ahead and be negative. If you're in the war zone in Afghanistan, or you're stuck in a slum in India, go ahead and be negative. But you're not, right? You don't have to literally fend for survival every day. And in this context that you find yourself, where you're not fighting for survival, it's in fact more adaptive, more productive to be positive, because you'll have better relationships, you'll have better success, you'll feel good from the inside out. And so I think it is possible to train ourselves. And what I would say, and this actually goes back a little bit to this question of, did technology kind of tap into what already existed, or did it put things in us? I would say that we have what some researchers call latent propensities. We have latent propensities for negativity. We have latent propensities for positivity. We have latent propensities for selfishness, self-centeredness. We have, in equally strong measure, propensities for altruism and other-centeredness, and so on. And what comes out, what gets nurtured, what is exhibited, is what we practice. Okay, and the more we practice one side of things, the more the angelic side of us gets more nurtured, as opposed to the demonic side. Okay, and oftentimes we don't even recognize it. One of the other two sides just nurtured and reinforced just by the environment, by the particular set of things that we get exposed to, which we don't control, like the news or the set of people we hang around, and so on. But once we recognize that we have both sides, and it's like feeding the dog, right? Whichever dog you feed is going to be the stronger one. And so you've got to make a choice at some point of which dog do I feed. Okay. And so, yeah, what you said about, is it changeable? Does it depend on the environment? Does it depend on who you hang out with? Absolutely, it does. Okay. I'll give you a very, very quick example of this. A study done at Stanford University where they had this game called the dictator game, right? So I'm just going to simplify
I like
this.
it already. The dictator game. Yes.
Yeah.
My employees might tell you I play that already. I don't know. But let's hear how Stanford played it.
Right. What happens in this game is that, two people are invited into the lab, and one of them is randomly picked out to be the quote unquote dictator, and they're given a certain sum of money, let's say $10. And they're told that, okay, you get to split this money between yourself and this other person. Okay. And that other person cannot complain. They just have to walk out with whatever they get. Okay. That's the dictator game. And so let's say I'm the dictator, you and I are playing the game, and I get $10 and I give you $3. I keep $7 to myself. There's nothing you can do about it. You walk away with $3. Okay. There's also another game called the ultimatum game. And the ultimatum game, the same setup, I get $10. I split it 7-3, and you can say, screw you, I don't want the $3. That's unfairly low. And then I wouldn't get the 7. Okay. So I have an incentive to give you enough just above the level of your cutoff so that I get to keep something. Okay. In the ultimatum game. In the dictator game, you can't do anything. Okay. So rationally speaking, quote unquote, rationally, I should keep all 10 or, close to 10 and give you very little. So this is the background, right? And what they did was very clever. They called these people into these lab and they said, okay, we're going to play these games. And for one set of people, they call them community games. Okay, community games. For the other set, they call them Wall Street games. Wall Street. Okay. And then they looked at the amount of money that was distributed. Okay. And it turned out that in the set of participants in the group, where it was called the community games, people were making much higher contributions and allocations to their partners than in that context in which they were called the Wall Street games. Okay, just the simple relabeling of an otherwise identical game makes a big difference to how people behave. So, it's, I think, a very, very revealing experiment, because it tells you that the context, the environment, the signals that we see can have a huge impact on our behaviors. Okay.
Yeah.
And going back to this, we have two sides, the kind of positive and the negative. It's not a big surprise that the environment we choose to expose ourselves to, often it's a matter of choice, but oftentimes the environment we find ourselves in can have a big impact on how we behave.
Yeah. And that was true for both the dictator game and the ultimatum, that they were more giving.
Go back and look at the exact set of nature of things that they did, but I believe, they played both games.
Yeah, for just calling it. So, yeah, I have a teacher who shared the way he phrased it is the context is decisive.
Yes.
And I'm hearing that in Wall Street game versus, community game. That's fascinating. That's really fascinating. And the other thing I love that you talk about in your book is where you mention, some people will, when they offer like a rebuttal or a yeah, but is, if I'm choosing to reframe and refocus all the time, if I have to do that, I can diminish my success drive or my survival instinct or whatever. But I like how you liken that to strength. You're like, well, you can have big muscles, but it doesn't mean you have to use them all the time, right? So you can turn it on and off, so to speak.
Exactly. So I think that one of the things that people say about this idea of gaining personal responsibility for your happiness, right? I think it's in that context that I talk about it. That if you are, capable of being happy in every moment, some people are worried that, will I just be kind of like an idiot that's just going around smiling despite whatever is happening and not really paying attention to things and so on.
Which is a valid concern, by the way, right? I mean, but if you're happy, who cares? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's up to you. I think that's where I use that analogy of, if you're really, really strong, are you going to kind of go around slapping everybody all the time just because you're strong? No, you have the capacity to be happy at all times. You have the capacity to choose to be equanimous and content or whatever, but doesn't mean that every situation calls for that emotion. In some situations,
it doesn't mean you have to let people walk all over you.
No, in fact, I think that, at least for me, what I've discovered is that the more centered and stable I am, right, and it takes a lot of work to get there, obviously, then the less I am susceptible to being influenced in ways I do not want to be influenced by other people. I can look people straight in the eye and tell them that you committed something that was an unfair act, much more strong, much more, say, productively, with a desirable result than I can if I were perturbed and I lost it and I became angry and I was in a fit of rage. That leads often to behaviors in a way that are very counterproductive.
No question. Will you tell me a little bit about what you've discovered about the link between generosity and happiness?
Yeah. So again, I mean, I would want to kind of, just to be technically correct, it's not my own work, but it's the work of many scholars. And essentially, what a lot of findings show is that being generous is one of the most reliable, most sustainable sources of positivity. Right. I interviewed this remarkable researcher. She's perhaps one of the best known in this field of positive psychology, by the name of Sonia Lyubomirsky, who's got a bunch of books out there.
Yeah,
on the how of happiness.
Yeah.
And I interviewed her, and she uses this term to refer to expressing gratitude. And she calls it a kind of meta strategy. Okay. Meta strategy, meaning that it's a strategy that's above all other strategies. Meta means above. And the reason she calls it a meta strategy for happiness is because it hits on so many of the reasons or sources of happiness. So just to give you a couple, one thing that gratitude does is, when you express gratitude, is that it obviously makes other people like you better, right? So right off the bat, it kind of embeds you in these kind of positive reciprocal relationships. And to the extent that relationships matter a lot to human beings, which it does, of course, we are highly social as a species, you're doing the right thing to elicit a positive response from other people. Okay, so that's one. The second thing that it does is that it kind of diminishes the propensity for you to experience what some other researchers call hubristic pride. Hubristic pride is when you feel you're superior to other people and that, you're special, you're better than them. And if you achieve some success and, you pat yourself on the back and you say, nobody else could have done it and I'm the one and so on, that's when you feel hubristic pride. Now, in that same situation, if instead you looked around and said, okay, surely I did a lot of things, but surely a lot of things out of my control that cooperated with me, without which I could not have achieved this success, then you feel this gratitude. You feel gratitude towards maybe your parents, your mentors, your teachers. You can go all the way back to your birth and say, fact that I was born in this lovely country, I mean, supposing I didn't have a choice of where I was born. Supposing I'd been born in, let's say, in a war-struck zone, right? I could not have done this. So when you express gratitude, you're giving credit in a very legitimate way. This is not delusional thinking. In a very legitimate way, you're giving credit to sources that actually contributed to your happiness and to your success. And when you do that, you're kind of suppressing your ego, or you're kind of lowering the attribution of the success to your egotistical self. And therefore, you're less likely to feel hubristic pride, and you're more likely to feel a sense of connection and love and gratitude to the external world. And so you can think of gratitude as a kind of a bridge that takes you from an egotistical set of emotions to a non-egotistical set of emotions. And it turns out the non-egotistical set of emotions have a longer shelf life. So gratitude hits on relationships. It hits on you experiencing non-egotistical emotions, which have a longer chance to last a longer time. And also it makes you feel less vigilant, less prone to kind of anxiety, and therefore you sleep better. Just a wonderful kind of a practice, gratitude. There is a book that I would recommend in this context called Thanks, by a guy called Emmons, Emmons is his last name.
What do you like about that book?
It's a research-based book, so that's one of the biases that I have, is that I'm more likely to believe something, I suppose I should say, subscribe to something if it's got some data backing it up. And so it's a very research-based book, and it outlines a lot of these reasons why gratitude enhances happiness levels and also chances of success. Yeah,
all those reasons make sense, and it just feels good, right?
Yeah.
There's a couple things I really like about this book as well. One is that you have incorporated into it a kind of pay it forward component.
That's right.
Yeah, and I would love if you'd be willing to talk about that, and then maybe we'll just start with that, and then I'll go to the next one, which is your Coursera course. I want to understand a little bit more why you did that and what it's been like, because last I heard there were more than 125,000 people that have gone through this program, and I'm sure it's increased since then. But will you start by telling me about the Pay It Forward?
I have a kind of part of my website. My website is happysmarts.com, and one of the pages on it is the Pay It Forward page, where you can buy my book for any amount that you want to contribute towards the book. You'll be charged some amount of money for the shipping, which is kind of out of my control. But anyway, yeah, so you can pay as little as $0 and you'd get a book shipped to you. And that's happening because somebody else paid for this book, somebody who came before you in this chain. And then you can choose to pay as much as you want for the next person to buy the book. And it can be as little as $0. It can be as much as, I think the highest that I've gotten is $150 or something.
Wow.
That's not bad. But actually, I shouldn't say I have gotten it. It kind of goes back to kind of feeding the chain, right?
Yeah.
So it's been going on now for like 3 years, and we have sold about, I want to say, 800 books or something like that.
Wow.
As long as that. So it's not like super long. I mean, astoundingly high number, but it's not a bad number either. Okay. So that's the idea. I got this idea from a set of findings, and this one speaker that came into my class and guest spoke. His name is Nipun Mehta. Nipun Mehta. He's got a nice TEDx talk on this idea of giftivism. And he basically kind of believes that people actually want to give, want to be altruistic. And so that's the opposite of the kind of homo economicus model of, people are selfish and people do things only when it benefits them. And so they did a bunch of experiments, and he's got this kind of a real world experiment. It's called Karma Kitchen. It's in the Bay Area, and it's in a few other places around the world. And basically, you can go into the Karma Kitchen, and it's the same concept that somebody else who came before you has paid for your meal, and now you can afford to pay as much as you want, you can pay as much as you can afford, or you don't pay at all. And so I just thought that was very neat. And I thought, okay, let me do this. Okay. So I just bought basically, can't remember now exactly how many copies I bought, but I bought a bunch of copies. And I said, okay, this is going to be seed copies, and let's see how long it goes. And like I said, it's been going on for about 3 years now.
That's so great.
Yeah.
Will you talk to me a little bit about your decision to create this as an online course and to give the course away free as well? What motivated you to do that? What the response has been?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I happen to be in a very lucky position, right? That I have a day job. That's not just a day job. It's a well-paying day job. You know, I don't know if people know this, but as a business school professor, you basically get more for doing very similar work to, let's say, a person in economics or psychology does. But, double, maybe sometimes triple the amount of salary, right? Just because we happen to be in the business school. Business school, costs more for students to get in. And I think in some way that funnels back to the faculty teaching. So basically what I'm trying to say is that, I'm very comfortable. I'm not saying this to kind of boast or anything like that, really out of gratitude. I think so I have a day job. And so when I wrote this book, when I thought of these concepts and I wanted to disseminate it, it wasn't from the perspective of I want to make money out of this. I just want to spread the word, and to the extent possible, if it has a positive effect on people, then that was my primary motivation. And so when I got the opportunity to try this out and offer the course content online, I jumped at it. I was also very curious intellectually about how this whole thing would work, because online education is new, right? Even now it's new. And when I first offered this course, and when I first actually had the invitation, it was in 2014, pretty early days of online education, at least MOOCs, okay, massive open online courses. And so I just jumped at it. And like you said, it's been, really well received, way beyond my dreams and aspirations. 250,000 students.
Wow.
Okay.
Amazing.
From literally every country in the world. And over, 4,000 ratings, and on average a 4.8 rating for the course out of 5. And it's been rated the best MOOC, massive open online course for 2015 and 16 and 17. I don't know what's going to happen for 18. We'll see the results soon. So really, really well received. And again, I don't say this to boast, but I think it speaks to the fact that there's a deep, deep hunger for the topic of happiness around the world.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And to have the content be something that's, I do think motive matters, right? And your motive was not to get rich, clearly. You're giving it away. It wasn't, I don't think, to impress others. And I think that authenticity comes through, and the fact that, you've sat down with so many of these leading thinkers and created video, and it's just amazing to me that you've done that. So that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I find, myself again being very grateful for being in a place where I could do it. And like you said, I interviewed about 25 people, and some of these are like really big time thinkers and professors like Dan Ariely and Tom Gilovich and Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, Sonia Lyubomirsky, Ed Diener, really big names in the field. And, they all kind of spared some of their time for me to interview them. On average, I would say about an hour, even though on the course itself, each one probably figures for about 2 minutes, right? So, yeah, it's really amazing that I was part of this experiment.
Well, and I think you're right, too, that there is a deep hunger for this, and it makes sense to me, when I stand back. And someone pointed out, that really the concerns facing us as a society, once you get past, which not to say, you overlook them or think they're a simple thing, because they're not. But, if you look at global warming, you look at nuclear proliferation, you look at artificial intelligence, clearly there's some big concerns and work to do there, including all the environmental degradation that's happening. But right along with that is like, okay, these twin concerns of human happiness and well-being and longevity. Mm-hmm. That's like all this, that we've reached a point where we are secure enough, and these, we're up Maslow's hierarchy far enough that although clearly there's still many people that don't have access to basic concerns, water and healthcare and education and so forth, there are so many of us who are, blessed to be in a place where materially we're pretty well off, asking ourselves, is this it? Or is, that addiction or that suicide or the depression or whatever that so many people are falling into, that it's clear, like life is not working for many people. And my hope is that this is the moment of transformation or awakening.
Yeah.
Where the world does start to work for everyone. And I choose to believe it is.
Yeah. Yeah. The kind of jury is out there, right? We'll see which way it'll go. I do think that we are at a pivotal point, although, many people will point out that there's been many occasions in the past too when big thinkers have said, this is the pivotal point, this is the pivotal point. But right now it feels like it because of, a lot of the factors that you mentioned. Like artificial intelligence, it has a lot of promise, but it also comes with a lot of potential for peril. I think particularly when you multiply that with internet and the potential for ideas to spread really fast, so on, who knows, but I'm like you, I'm kind of an optimist.
Yeah. I want to ask you just a few more questions on this topic before we transition to the next segment. But one thing I want to ask you about, I love what you said. This was on a podcast I listened to with you. I think you said somebody asked you to define happiness. And I heard you say that it's being lighthearted, but not at the cost of compassion or rationality.
Yeah.
You still feel that way, or would you give an alternate definition?
I still feel that way. I think that to some extent, one's definition of what happiness is going to be personal. And it's going to reflect your personality, and your personality is probably a function of your genetics and your early life experiences. And for me, I like it a lot. I think the most positive experiences of my life have been when I've felt this sense of lightheartedness, where even if I'm doing things that are important and serious, I don't take myself too seriously. Okay.
Yeah.
And that lightheartedness, that ability to see the lighter side of things, the ability to have an easy laugh, of banter, of being in a playful mood, even if I'm doing things that are, intellectually heavy, for example, I've gravitated towards that. To other people, it might be the sense of spiritual oneness or a deep sense of love and connection with other people. Everyone's got their own kind of favorite emotion, I feel. And for me, it's this lightheartedness. And I wanted to put in those two other kind of counterweights to that lightheartedness of rationality and compassion, because sometimes, even if I don't, other people kind of wonder if you're lighthearted doesn't mean that you're making fun of every situation, even if other people are taking it seriously. No, I mean, I don't want to come across that way. So I don't want to make sure that I'm not stepping on anybody else's toes or offending anybody. So I do want to be compassionate. That comes, in a sense, first. That I want to make sure that my lightheartedness is within the boundaries of compassion. And neither do I want to be, like we discussed some time back, right, a village idiot, right?
Right.
In a very delusional way, without recognizing the gravity of the situation or something like that. It's not that either. So within those two extremes, I do think that there's a lot of scope to play around, and that's where I want to.
I think so too. So let me ask you this. The concept of Leela, right, is something I had not been exposed to before just a couple years ago. And it's something I sure think about a lot. Would you be willing to share? You and I have never talked about this particular concept before. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to just kind of share what your understanding of this term is and what your thoughts are about it.
Okay. Nobody's ever asked me this question.
Yes.
Actually, you've asked me quite a few questions that nobody's asked. I'm very impressed with your questions and the amount of research that you put into this, obviously. It's awesome. So, Leela, for those who are not familiar with the concept, is kind of like, I would say, a Hindu religious kind of a term. And the term being referring to the creation and existence being a kind of a dance, a cosmic dance, and a playful cosmic dance, kind of promulgated, I don't know if that's the word, by the gods, because, they were just kind of wanted to have fun and they wanted an outlet for their creativity. And so everything that you see, everything that exists is just a manifestation of that grand dance, the leela, the play, so to speak. And I like that concept a lot. And perhaps it's not very surprising given the definition of happiness I have, which is one of lightheartedness and playfulness. And that very much taps into the idea that, look, I mean, even if whatever is happening right now seems extremely serious and, negative, if it's just a play at the end of the day, then, you can go home at the end and kind of think of this as something that happened outside of you rather than to you. There is a danger, of course, that, some people might point out that if you look at it that way, then, you might not really kind of take things seriously, or at least take other people's negative emotions and the experience that they are having seriously, and they just brush it off and say, it's just a play, you're screwed, but so what, it's a play, and while you yourself have this cushy life. And so that's why the compassion angle is important, right? I mean, I don't want to not be compassionate. But I think that it makes it's emotionally appealing to me, but I think that intellectually also it makes sense for me. At least for me, it makes sense, this idea. And I'll tell you why. The reason is because if you think to how things unfold, right? Things don't happen randomly. I think things happen because of things that happened before them. If there's rain falling down, it's because water was sucked up by the sun into the skies, and then at one point it kind of became too cold and heavy, and therefore it kind of stayed and did not go into the stratosphere. But then it has to come down once it gets cold because it's heavy now, and so on. And so everything has basically a root cause that came before it. And so everything is a concatenation of a set of events that are logically following from things that happened before them. And if you kind of rewind all this back, I guess you would end up at the Big Bang, which is the most prevalent or well-accepted theory of the origins of the universe, which is a bizarre theory because, first time somebody hears of it, I mean, they really wonder, I mean, this can't be scientific, right? Because, according to that, as you know, I mean, everything that we know existed in a space smaller than the head of a pin drop, and then expanded out from there to billions of galaxies with billions of stars each, with all of us, every single molecule that you see here, you, me, everything, we're all tightly packed together in a space smaller than the space of a pinhead, right? We're all deeply connected. And all of this is an unfolding of that moment. And so if you look at it from that perspective, everything is pre-programmed and there is no such thing as free will. And things are happening because of things that happened before them, that they're propelling other people to behave. I mean, not other people, but physical objects to behave in a certain fashion. But even things that we think are volitional, you didn't choose where you were born. You didn't choose your genetic hardwiring. You didn't choose your social upbringing. So if somebody else were born exactly as you, with your upbringing and with your kind of looks and everything, would they behave any differently? Probably not, and some people would say definitely not, because that's who you are. I mean, that's how you're programmed to behave. And so, if that is true, then at some level, the thing that we are assuming is our behavior is actually the behavior of the grand universe, just manifesting itself through us. And so that is the definition of a play, in a sense, is that you're acting a role without realizing that, you're in that role, you get caught up in that role, but it's a role. And the role was given to you outside of you. You didn't decide on that role. And so, it's consistent with this idea of the Leela, with the gods playing through us, and just expressing their creativity. And it's simultaneously, for me, very freeing, which is why emotionally, I guess I like it, because it just tells me that, look, I mean, obviously I don't want to commit any crimes or anything like that. And, because that would make the play take a turn that, it'd be difficult for me to live with. But, conceptually, that would be a turn that was taken by the gods and not me, according to this kind of way of looking at things. Anyway, long kind of answer to your question, but that's where I stand on it.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I think it's such an interesting concept, and there's so many implications. I remember reading Einstein's biography just a year or so ago. And at one point, this was the one that Isaacson wrote, and it's suggesting that Einstein also believed, or at least strongly considered, that there is no such thing as free will, whether it's electrons or planets in, orbit, that everything behaves according to certain laws and principles. And why would human behavior be anything different? And as much as people, me might not want to believe that, at the same time, if I'm honest and I step back and say, what proof do I have otherwise?
Yeah.
None. I mean, what proof do I have that it's true or false? None. But for me, interesting to think about.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, that was, and I hope that was useful to you who were listening as well. This idea of Leela, basically a play. The part of it that I think is both intriguing and sometimes concerning to me, which I love the idea, is this idea that life is a purposeless play, that life is the purpose, right? So how interesting. And if that perspective is adopted, how much easier it is to appreciate, enjoy, be happy in that moment.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so last question before we transition. I want to ask you about the work you do inside the Whole Foods Academy for Conscious Leadership. Will you tell me how that came about, what your involvement is, what the result of it has been, that kind of thing?
Sure. Yeah. So I'll jump to the kind of present moment. Right now, that Academy of Conscious Leadership has been dissolved.
Oh, that was Bezos.
Huh?
I knew it. I knew this was going to happen.
I think it happened even before he took on that role, before he came into Whole Foods. But the way it happened, if I remember this correctly, in 2012, I went and gave a talk at Whole Foods here in Austin. As you know, it's headquartered here. And some of the people there in that talk liked what I had to say. And so they said, hey, we hold these workshops and we also have this thing called the Academy of Conscious Leadership. And as you might know, John Mackey has a book, right, co-authored with Raj Sisodia called Conscious Capitalism.
Yeah, and Raj has been a guest on this show as well, you might know.
Okay, very good. He's a good friend of mine too.
Oh, amazing human being.
Yeah, he is. Awesome. So they said, would you like to be part of this? And I said, yes, of course. And so I've been to, I want to say 4, 5, of these workshops, events. I remember we're going to one in somewhere in near Phoenix, another one up in Wisconsin. And then, I've been to a couple here in Austin itself. And, the idea was very much along the lines of, this idea of conscious capitalism, right? So value-driven, and, part of the value system being, one for all for one, kind of a setup. No profits by itself not being bad, but coming out as a byproduct of leading a value-driven life of trying to improve, various stakeholders' lives. Obviously customers, but also I think more importantly, starting with the employees and the environment and so on. So I loved it. I really, really enjoyed hanging out with people from Whole Foods, the senior management, the middle management. I found myself in a good way preaching to the choir in terms of the things that I shared with them. They really resonated with them. I felt like I was part of a family. So it was very good.
Awesome. Okay, so I want to transition to the lightning round.
Okay.
Questions that are designed to be read briefly. You can answer them as long as you want.
Okay.
First question. Please complete the following sentence with something other than a box of chocolates. Life is like a...
Pause.
Okay. Life is like a pause. Okay. Number 2, what's the best news you've heard recently?
The best news I heard recently was that I am going to be giving a bunch of talks to people who I think really need to hear this message of what can make them happier. So these are people who are living out the last years of their life, and they are very curious about what the science of happiness has to say. So
wow,
I'm thrilled and very grateful to be to have the opportunity to talk to them.
That's beautiful. Is that there in Austin, or will that be?
Yes, this is in Austin.
Wow, wonderful. Okay, next question. What's something at which you wish you were better?
Yeah, there's a lot of things that I wish that I was better at. One of the things that I wish I was very good at is speaking multiple languages. I speak three quite well. I can understand or can I get by with another fourth one, but I wish that I could speak as many as 20 or 30. Actually, if I could speak them all, then that would be ideal. And the reason I say this is because I really love understanding cultures and people, right?
Yeah.
And language gives you so much more. It's like a window into another person's culture, right? If you understand what's going on, how they speak and what they're saying and how they think, wow, that would like basically kind of make the whole world a stage for me to go and to have a good time. Yeah. So that's what I would like to do.
No, that's beautiful. I'm counting on Google just giving me that little babblefish. We'll just do that. What are the three that you speak well now?
English, and then Tamil, which is my mother tongue, and Hindi.
Oh, okay.
I don't know. Hindi is the most popular language in India, so I just wanted to mention.
I heard there's like 800 different languages like actually spoken and many more or something. Is that true?
There are 26 or something like that languages, and then there are dialects, maybe in the 800s.
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's a lot. Yeah.
Wow. Okay, next question. If you were required every day for the rest of your life to wear a T-shirt with a slogan on it, or a phrase, or a saying, or a quote, or a quip, what would the shirt say? So
I've actually thought about this. Okay, there are two things that I could have the T-shirt say. One thing this is a simpler one. This would say, the weather in my head is always sunny. Okay. And this is more of an aspirational T-shirt rather than what's reality, because I'm still working on it. But the second T-shirt, and this is something that maybe, because you're kind of from the business background, you can tell me if a T-shirt like this would sell. So different people have different things that they like, right? I mean, like, for example, for me, nice cold beer on a hot day, that's like awesome.
Yeah.
I also like to kind of sleep in, right?
Sure.
And kind of wake up late. Okay. Sleeping in is a big thing for me. Okay. Then playing with my kids, right, is a big thing for me. I love popping those bubbles on bubble wraps.
Yes.
There's a bunch of things like this. Okay. So imagine that you have a T-shirt that has nothing like an ice cold beer on a hot sunny day, right? Nothing like hanging out with my kids and so on. And then all of those would be like in lighter kind of shade of gray. And then in bright orange, it says in much bolder, big letters, nothing like life. Okay. So that's the idea. So nothing like a lot of small things that happen to be idiosyncratically things that I like, but overall nothing like life. And everybody's got their own set of things that floats their boat, so to speak.
I love it.
Yeah. Okay.
That's great. If you ever make that shirt, I'll be your first customer.
Yeah. The idea would be that you go to a website and then you fill in all these nothing like blanks. And then all of those, maybe 10 of them, and then all of those would be the background. And then on top of it would say nothing like life.
I love it. That's great. And I can imagine this could be one of those sites where there's like the upvoted and you choose which ones, right? That's great. Awesome. Okay. Next question. What book, and you've already mentioned one, so maybe this is it, or maybe it's something different, but what book other than your own have you gifted or recommended most often?
Oh, that's a good one. I think in the last 2 or 3 years, so it would really depend on, when you ask me this question, but in the last 2 or 3 years, I would say that it's probably been Give or Take by Adam Grant. I don't know if you've had a chance to read it.
I've not read it, but I read the parts in your book where you mentioned some of what Adam shares.
Yeah. He'd be a great guy for your podcast. He's obviously very busy and all that. So maybe getting him to commit sometime in the next, I don't know if you've asked him.
I haven't yet. And if you know him and if you'd be willing to make an introduction, I would love to invite him.
Okay.
But if not, that's fine too.
No, he's one of those guys, he walks the talk, right? So he says that being kind and compassionate and nice to other people is super important, not just because it's the right thing to do, but also because it enhances your chances of success. And he actually, I wrote to him out of the blue, and he wrote a blurb for my book, and he's been like really great. He wasn't able to do an interview himself, but he proposed somebody else, and that's what he might do with this too. So I don't mind.
Yeah. Awesome. So that's the one though. Recently is Give and Take? Give and Take? Give and Take. That came out in 2014. That was his first book. It's a masterpiece in my opinion. And then I think he's come out with 2 books. One is called Originals.
Yep. and that one's also been very well received. And then Plan B, I think, with
with Sheryl Sandberg.
Sheryl Sandberg. Yeah.
Is it option or Plan? But
yeah, maybe it's option B. Yeah.
Before 2 or 3 years ago, what might have been your answer to that question?
Okay. So look, I mean, I have a little bit of interest in kind of spirituality and those kinds of topics. And there was a time when I was really taken in by this book called A Search in Secret India by a guy called Paul Brunton. He wrote the book, I think, in 1930s, before the British had left India. He ends up at the ashram of one of these spiritual kind of gurus, big gurus of that time. His name is Ramana Maharishi. And just a bunch of kind of his sort of experience. It's like a travelogue almost, but written by a spiritual guy who's in the quest for discovering, life's kind of answering big questions. And so I got to know more about Ramana Maharishi through reading that book than through what my parents and other people had told me about him. So it's not really a biography of Ramana Maharishi. If anything, it's a kind of biography of Paul Brunton. It's a very fascinating book. I really liked it.
That sounds like something I would enjoy. I just told my wife maybe 6 months ago, I said, partly to give myself something to look forward to, right? Like consciously inventing a future to live into. I said, because I love to walk. I do a 50-mile walk every year here in Salt Lake. We do
50-mile walk.
Yeah, 50 miles in 20 hours. So I'm fond of kind of these extreme challenges or unusual feats. And so I said to my wife just last year,
it's got to be like 20 continuous hours.
Yeah.
Okay. So do you already know when you're going to do it this year?
Yeah. So we do it the Saturday after Labor Day. We've penciled that in. I think it's the 8th or 9th of September.
And when you say we, who all go on this walk?
Every year I invite just friends and family and people that I think, that I've been kind of meeting and mixing with recently. And most people that do it it's a one and done, if they even finish. But if you're interested, I'll be sure to keep you on my notification.
Sure. Yeah. Let me know. So have you heard of a movie called The Way?
No.
So have you heard of this, what is the thing called? The Compostela, I always kind of get the name mixed up. So this is a kind of a pilgrimage that for a very long time, a lot of Christians have taken starting from near Barcelona, going all the way to Compostela. I think that's the name of the place. So Santiago de Compostela or something. Okay, so just Google it and check out this movie called The Way, with Martin Sheen and his son, Emilio Estevez, is his son.
Yeah. Martin Sheen, then had Charlie Sheen, I believe, is his son, and Emilio Estevez are brothers, I think.
Yeah. So check that movie. I think you'll like it.
Cool.
And it'll give you a little bit of an idea of what I'm talking about. So this is an 8-kilometer path. So the reason I bring it up is because, I want to do that walk. And, maybe I can convince you to kind of like shift geographies a little bit and go to Europe.
Sounds amazing.
Like section hiking over like 10 years,
wow.
50 miles.
Sounds cool. Yeah, I'll definitely check it out. Because the thing I told my wife is I said, when I turn 60, I want to walk across India.
Oh, yeah?
Okay,
what do you mean across India? From where to where?
Well, I thought I would start from south, like Tamil, to the Himalayas, but I actually think I'd probably go the other way.
Good for you.
Yeah, so that's my plan. And so this book, Search in Secret India, that could be good. I know it was a long time ago, but that could be good kind of preparation. And I think Maharishi was Vivekananda's teacher.
No, that is Ramakrishna Paramahamsa.
Okay, so Ramakrishna. And who's the guy that...
Okay. Ramana Maharishi, interesting guy. He was only in the south, from Tamil Nadu, which is where I'm from. And ended up kind of, I guess he didn't want to do it, but I mean, he ended up founding this ashram in a place called... I'm blanking on the name of the place, but it's close to Chennai. Have you heard of Chennai?
Yeah, I've been there.
You've been there, okay.
Yeah, I did Sadhguru's rally for rivers with him.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, a year ago, October. I did half of it,
okay.
2 weeks, so visited quite a few. But okay, so I've totally taken us off course from the lightning round. I'm going to bring us back. So here we go. So you travel a ton. What's one travel hack, something you do or something you take with you when you travel to make your travel less painful or more enjoyable?
Okay, so I have several travel hacks. I would say that one of the important ones for me is to take some melatonin with me, and I pop it on the flight just before I want to go to sleep, half an hour before it, and then maybe have a glass of wine, maybe two, and then it knocks me out. Okay. And then I wake up and I feel good to go wherever I land. Okay. So part of that is also that I try and choose flights that will put me in the next morning in the next place, wherever I go to. Now, this will only work if the travel time is at least 6 hours or so. Okay. If it's less than that, then I have a different, I don't do this. The other thing that I do is that I try to check myself into a hotel with a nice gym. Okay. That's one of my requirements is that, for me, a healthy lifestyle is quite critical for me. And if I don't have it, then everything else falls apart. So I need to sleep well, I need to eat well, I need to exercise well. And so the exercising part, so I kind of choose a hotel. And I also say, I must say that I've been lucky that in the last 5 years or so, I've been fortunate enough to be able to afford to travel by business class. And, if that is something that is within the realm of possibility for somebody, then I would suggest considering it because it does vastly improve your experience once you land. And I know that it feels like a waste of money, like spending 3 times as much, maybe 5 times sometimes as much traveling by business class as it does. And you think that this is just travel, and how can it be that important? Why should I spend so much? But to me, at least, it makes a big difference.
Yeah.
But I'm also tall. I'm like 6'2", so. For maybe shorter people, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah.
And lastly, I guess, I don't know if you want, it's okay for me to talk about one last one, but I would
Please.
say that just traveling lightly, I think that if you can figure out, okay, here are the number of days that I'm going to be there, and here are exactly the numbers of underwear that I need, and figuring out if, there's potential for getting laundry done, and here are the number of PJs I need, and here are the number of socks I need, and so on, and just taking that amount, maybe one extra, that's it, and packing well, because traveling light really kind of comes in handy, I think.
And by the way, in nearly 30 interviews, those are things that no guest has said.
Really?
Some of them, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so next question. What is one thing you've started or stopped doing in order to live or age well?
Okay. So one thing that I've stopped doing is over drinking. Okay. I think that there was a time when I was very prone to consuming a lot of alcohol. It put me in a good space temporarily, and just wasn't good for me the next day and overall for my life. Okay, I wasn't by any stretch of the imagination an alcoholic or anything like that, but I would just go with the flow, and I'd kind of make a tentative plan of maybe like having 3-4 drinks, and then by the time I was like, and no more than that, but by the time I had 3 or 4 drinks in me, my perspective would have changed, and I'd be like grooving, maybe dancing to the music or whatever, and then before I knew it, I was like 5, 6, 8 down, so, and then I would pay a heavy price the next day. So that's something that I don't do as much, not necessarily with the aim of aging well, I would say. It just partly doesn't sit well with me, and it's kind of pointless now, to even go there. That's what I feel. But I've also started in the last about 3-4 years taking supplements. And I don't know to what extent they work or don't, but maybe they just have a placebo effect and I feel good. But it's kind of an experiment that I'm trying out. And so I'll tell you, I take about 5 supplements. I take omega-3, okay? I take vitamin D. I take vitamin C, okay? Omega-3, vitamin D, vitamin C. And then I take spirulina. Okay, I don't know if you've heard of it.
I've heard of it. What do you take it for? What benefit does it give you?
So I think it's an alkaline thing. And, we tend to be acidic in our eating habits. And so it kind of neutralizes. Okay, that's my understanding. I did this research a while back. Okay.
Yeah.
And I've kind of forgotten now exactly what these things do, but I've been taking them for a while. And finally, I take green tea extract, which has some antioxidant properties or something like that, and it's a kind of a boost of caffeine as well. So I take all of these 5 things in the morning, right with my breakfast. So we'll see. Okay, if I live to be 120, we can have this talk.
Yeah, and no multivitamin.
Yeah, the 2 vitamins that are there, vitamin D and vitamin C, are the important ones, and I take those for now.
What's one thing you wish every American knew?
I would say that a lot of Americans know this, right? But a lot more Americans don't know this, that America is not the center of the world,
What? Are you sure?
Yeah, so I don't... Look, I love America, right? I love Americans. I think this is the best country in the world, okay? And oftentimes, I think this is something that the non-Americans need to learn. Everybody likes to beat down on America and say that, they're a bunch of ignorance and they're self-centered and, all they know is their own country and so on. And people stop appreciating the fact that, this is the most immigrant-friendly country the world has ever seen, right? Ever seen. So, and I think it's very important to put that in perspective and recognize that first. But having said that, I think Americans are basically great people, all of them, and a lot of them obviously have traveled a lot. I think, I don't know the stats on this, but if you take a look at the number of people from any country as a proportion of the number of people that live in the country who have traveled abroad, I imagine America would be in the top 10. I don't know what the stats are, but so it is a well-traveled country, and I happen to inhabit a world in which I meet a lot of them. But it's also true that a lot of Americans don't go out. I've heard some stats like only 10% of Americans have passports or something like that. I don't know what the stats are on that, but it's a surprisingly low number. And I think that if Americans just traveled out more, they'd recognize that that we live in a world that is deeply interconnected, and there's just no way to just have this be a separate country that you live by your own rules and you demand things out of people from other countries, and that just America could be very prosperous, and even if it comes at a cost to other people's prosperity, it's no longer that world, at least. So
yeah,
I think that recognition and that fear that the rest of the world is out to get America and all that would also go away a little bit. And I think that other people would get to understand Americans better. It'd just be a win-win-win all around, in my opinion, if just more Americans traveled outside of America.
Yeah, I think you're right. So, okay, I want to put this here to make sure that I get to it. But if people want to connect with you or they want to learn more from you, what should they do?
Yeah, so they can write to me. My email is raj@happysmarts.com.
And that's R-A-J.
Yeah, R-A-J at HAPPYSMARTS, happysmarts.com. And I usually am good at responding, but I've also had some people write to me telling me that I tried writing to you earlier and I haven't heard from you, so I'm making a second attempt. So I apologize if I'm not able to return your email immediately, but my intention is to. And if you don't hear from me in a couple of days, please feel free to write back to me again. And I try to get back to everybody, but that's the way to contact me. Yeah.
Awesome. And then people can visit your website at happysmarts.com. People, of course, can find your book on Amazon or pretty much any online retailer, or hopefully as well in their local bookstore.
Yeah.
Right? While they still exist. So that's great. Okay. And then the other thing that I want to say here to make sure that I get it in is that as an expression of gratitude to you, Raj, for making time to share your experience and your wisdom with me and everyone who's listening, I've made a small gesture by going online to kiva.org, and I've made a microloan to a 49-year-old woman named Sarabai, who happens to live in the Kutch district of Gujarat. She's engaged in the dairy business. She sells milk, ghee, curd, butter in her locality. And so anyway, it's just a small attempt at paying it forward a little bit.
That's awesome. That's really wonderful. Wonderful gesture.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Okay, so the last part, we've got just a few questions. I've got just a few questions for you related to writing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're willing to just switch gears one final time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Okay. So let's see. I have a few I want to be sure to ask, but before I ask anything, if I ask you when it comes to writing and remembering that part of what I'm endeavoring to do with this podcast is to give anyone listening a little bit of inspiration and a little bit of practical tools that they can use to help them complete any project they're in the middle of. It might be a writing project. It might be some other kind of creative project. But let's stay focused on writing for now, at least. What have you learned about writing that has served you well?
I think this might be a bit of a cliche to people who are aware of some of the kind of best practices in this, which is to just write, just do it, and carve out some time and don't kind of try to second guess whether you're in a good mood or you're going to have a writer's block or whatever. Just carve out, say, 3 hours, even if it's not that much time, even if it's just half an hour, 1 hour, whatever, but a regular time of the day when you're going to do it. Okay. And I would say that as you're thinking about that time, try and make it a time of the day when it's what I call your cream time. That is the time of the day when you're mentally sharpest and you're able to think well and you're able to engage in nuanced, creative kind of thinking. Okay. There's a book called When by Daniel Pink, who talks a little bit about the circadian rhythms and how different people have their peak performance during the day at different times of the day. For me, it happens to be between, I'd say, 8 a.m. and 11 a.m. In that window. And so the more of that time I devote to the more important stuff, and if writing is important to you, you want to, whatever it is, right? I mean, you said, let's take writing as an example, but if you just carve that time out for that activity and just do it, and not compromise on that and close your emails, get your phone off the hook, switch off, put your phone in airplane mode, close the door to your office, just sit down and be disciplined about it. I think that's the single best thing you can do for yourself.
What is your writing kryptonite?
So kryptonite is, remind me, it's something that is my Achilles heel.
So this is, it's a term from popular culture where Superman, who is basically invulnerable, like he's invulnerable, he's invincible, but if he's exposed to this one substance, it will totally just compromise his strength and effectiveness. So what kind of trips you up when it comes to writing? What compromises your good intentions and your efficacy and all this when it comes to writing? What's your writing kryptonite?
Yeah. So for me, I need to be in a good headspace, right? I think this would be true for everybody, not just for writing, but any important stuff. If I want to have a important, crucial conversation with somebody, right? I think I need to be in a good headspace. And there's lots of things that can, kind of derail me from that and push me off that good headspace ledge, so to speak. But one of the things that, the more common thing that does that is just not getting enough sleep the previous night. Okay. And if I've not gotten enough sleep, I don't feel as mentally sharp. I don't feel as centered. I don't feel that I'm in the good headspace. And relatedly, another thing that also kind of, is a kryptonite, I guess, is just having too many things, on my plate and not feeling relaxed, not having that sense of time abundance that you mentioned. So those are the two things. Those are related, but those are the things that are my kryptonites.
So when it comes to that, about having that good, that mental space that's conducive to writing, do you find, is that something that you've just kind of got to wait until it comes along, or have you found something that's reliably effective in creating it?
Yeah. So, it's kind of like, I guess, not ironic, but I don't know what the word is, but basically the things that I talk about in my book, right? As the habits of the highly happy. All of those things are very conducive for me to feel good about writing, to put me in a good headspace. So, for example, if I'm not chasing superiority, right, which is a sin, which is a happiness sin, but in the context of writing, if I'm not trying to write with this idea that, well, I want my book to be the bestseller. I mean, I want everybody to be impressed at how I'm writing or whatever. I want this to be the best ever book, the last word on happiness. And my thoughts are not there, but rather my thoughts are more on, okay, let me just get down to the process. The process is it, right? I mean, I just sit down from 9 to 12 and I just try to crank it out and do the best I can. And what I've discovered is, for me, I think this is true for everybody, it's an iterative process. You don't just sit down and everything flows. And people say this for some people, maybe it's true, but it never happened to me. That I just sit down. Okay, occasionally you get into a good zone and then you write 2 or 3 pages and they're more or less perfect, right? But by and large, what happens to me is that I have to go back to it and revise it and refine it and then come back to it and do the same thing again. It's the 20th iteration that I'm really satisfied with. So that's what I would say that is another tip which goes along with this protecting your cream time and finding a time of the day when you write, is that tell yourself that, look, I mean, this is going to take a while. This is going to be refined again and again and again, and it's in that process that you end up with a good product in the end. But to this question, I would say that all of these habits of the highly happy, for me, the foundation of a happy lifestyle and everything flows from that is for happiness is leading a healthy lifestyle. Which means eating well, exercising, and sleeping well. If you don't have that as a foundation, then forget about being happy. Because I mean, you're not at a cellular level, you're not feeling good from the inside. Then how can you aspire to be happy at the mental level? If your body is not feeling happy. So that's where I would start, and that's fundamental to writing well as well for me, is to lead a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah, no, it just makes so much sense, and it's congruent with my experience as well. Will you walk me through what it looks like, or what it looked like for you to go from concept to completion with this book? I know that's a big question, but how did you settle on the idea? How did you begin the outlining? How did you begin the drafting? How did you remain organized through that process? How did the editing? I mean, anything that kind of feels appropriate, if you were just to give me, a succinct summary of what was the process like?
I think there's a quote by one of these authors. I forget which author, but he said something like, writing a book is like driving in the dark with just your headlights on, and you just see the next thing that you want to write about. And in the end, if you're going and following a roadmap, you end up at your destination. And so it's kind of like that for me. I mean, I think that, I know that I had clarity on the broad topic, that it was about happiness. I also had a broad objective, which is to kind of distill the science and give people some recommendations that they would find useful. I knew who my target audience was, which was smart and successful people, and yet not very happy, perhaps. And all those were there. But I mean, in terms of how to structure the book and where to start and where to end and what to have in between and all that, all those are very much iterative. Like I said, I would have probably, written, I want to say, I'm not kidding, when I say this, about 300 versions of the book, or 300 iterations, you know? Yeah. Just a lot. I mean, it took me 6 years to complete the book, and other people are different. And of course, I still don't think it's perfect. And, now if I were to look back on it, one of the fundamental errors that I made is that it made it too long. For people who are smart and successful, and I know this because, I talk about it in the book, they are frenzied, harried people who are very, very short on time. And so, if as a good marketer, I should recognize that first and make it really short, maybe like 5 chapters or something, which I did not. That's where I think that to some extent my idealism got in the way, and I wanted to make the book, put in all the things that I thought were very, very important and useful. And this is for the authentic seeker, is how I convinced myself to make it as long. Anyway, so what I would say is that recognize it's going to be iterative. Doesn't mean that, you postpone the structuring of the book to later. It's just that whatever you think the structure is today, go with it with the flexibility and the open mind that it might change later, and almost invariably will. And once you have a broad structure, as soon as you encounter any stimulus in the world that is consistent or that is going to be useful for that, any part of the structure, just embed it into that part. So I would say open up folders and subfolders and say that, okay, this is chapter 1. This is going to be introduction on why happiness is important for smart and successful people. So anytime you hear in the news that, smart people are not very happy, or, how fame can lower your happiness, let's say you hear it on NPR, you just download that and then put it into that folder, for later use. And do that diligently all the way to the end, because you might say, oh, my introduction chapter is almost written, and it's complete almost, and now I hear this thing, news program that's relevant to that chapter, and how am I going to be able to incorporate it? So I won't even bother putting it in. No, don't do that. Just put it in. Maybe it'll come in handy later, and maybe you will end up revising the chapter even though you think that it's complete now. So that's the idea. So as and when you see things that are going to be relevant for your book, just embed them into the folder or the subfolder. This in turn calls for being organized on your folder, right, or on your computer, which I think is very, very important. And one of the things that helps me, I'm sure that a lot of your listeners are aware of this thing called Dropbox, right, where you can kind of save things on the cloud. That way, it doesn't matter where you're working from. You're able to access the same set of folders and files. And so you put everything in, and so it's organized. And then you can go back and then revisit these things and then figure out what to put where. One thing I've discovered is that, the really great books, and this is one of the other ways in which I think my book can be improved, is that although I have, like you said, a lot of personal examples and stories, I don't have a lot of examples of other people's stories. That's what really, I think, gets a reader really interested, is that if I were to talk about, okay, let me tell you what happened when Steve Jobs was 12 years old, right? As he was walking down from his home to the Hare Krishna or whatever, so that, and particularly if these are examples that are very interesting examples and powerful examples, but not too many people knew of them, people that they know, like Steve Jobs, that would really kind of, that's what gets them.
Yeah, Malcolm Gladwell's a master of that.
Malcolm Gladwell, Adam Grant, for that matter, right? I mean, that's one of the reasons why I think his book is a masterpiece. So that takes a lot of work. Takes this kind of work that I'm talking about, where as soon as you hear a story, you hear of a person, somebody mentioning a name, that this is what happened to them, and then you hear, oh yeah, what happened to Brian Miller? Do you know that? And then I say, okay, fine, it happened to him. It's very relevant to my book. Let me sit down and interview Brian Miller, and then I get it from you, and then I weave that into the book, right? So that's the way to do it.
Yeah. So that is a very high level of organization and diligence. And I heard you say that you worked on this book for 6 years. What was your writing routine like over that period? And because I hear 6 years, and especially if I imagine myself as a listener, that's simultaneously like encouraging, like, oh yeah, it is a journey. But then it's discouraging, like 6 years, Yeah,
it doesn't have to take 6 years for somebody else. It did for me. And you have to remember that, when I started teaching this course on happiness in 2009, I started writing the book in 2010. There was no book out there on this topic, right? And so I discovered that I was putting all this material together in a way that nobody, as far as I knew, had done. And so that's what led me to even contemplate writing the book. For other people, they might already know quite a lot about what they want to write about, and it's already kind of there in their head. So it's different, it might not take that long. But I think what is in general true is that it's going to take longer than you expect it to. I expected it to take 2 years. It took me 6 years. And what's also true is that it's going to be iterative, and you're going to change your mind on things as you ought to. I think that if you're stuck on things, then that's not a good sign. You got to revise and evolve and be open to changes. And those things are true, even if in good detail what you want to write about and what the book is going to be about.
Tell me about where, and this assumes one did, but tell me about where a book proposal entered into the equation for you.
That's good. Yeah. So what happened with me is that I started blogging for Psychology Today in March of 2011. Okay, I started writing the book somewhere in 2010, July maybe of 2010, and then March of 2011, I started blogging for Psychology Today. And then a guy called Eric Nelson just approached me out of the blue. Just wrote me an email saying that I've read one of your articles and I really like it. And I'm wondering if you're in the process of writing a book. And I said, yes, I am in fact in the process. Who are you? How can you help? And he said, look, I used to be an agent and now I used to be a editor at a publishing house at Penguin, I believe he said. And now I'm an agent because I think that the agents are not doing as good a job as they could. And so I'm just starting out. And I was wondering if I could be your agent because I think that you write well. And I said, sure, yeah. And he said, then, we got to kind of put this proposal together. And I said, what goes into the proposal? And he said, well, a couple of sample chapters and then what he called, some kind of evidence of your platform. At that point, I didn't know all these things, right? He said, do you have a following and all that? And I said, look, I'm blogging for Psychology Today, but that's it. I don't really have a following. But he really helped me put this proposal together. He helped me refine my chapters, and also kind of helped me think through how the book that I was intending to write is going to be different from other books that exist out there and so on. And so that's what, really kind of jump-started it. At that point, I had no idea who was going to publish it when I first started writing the book. And if he had not come into my world, I don't know how things would have evolved. I would have, I guess, reached out to some agent at some point. But yeah, that's how it transpired.
So how clear were you of what you wanted the book to be and do? Because I hear you say you didn't, have an agent, you didn't have a specific, like a plan with a publisher and that kind of thing. But as you were writing, and this question maybe relates also to the reader. How conscious were you of the reader during the actual act of writing, and how clear were you about what you wanted the book to do for, or even to, that reader?
Okay, that's a great question. So the way that I wrote the book, and this may not be the best way to write a book, right? I don't know. Okay, now I've never been asked a question that you asked me, so I'm just kind of telling you honestly what went on in my head is I was writing in a way that I felt that if I were to read this book, I want to be interested in the book. I want Raj, needs to find this book to be interesting. So I was trying to write to me as the audience, as opposed to imagining a Brian out there or imagining somebody smart and successful out there. Okay. Having said that, I'd been teaching this class for a while now, right? I mean, because like in 6 years that it took for me to write the book, I'd already begun teaching a year or two before I'd started the book even. So I'd had quite a bit of experience under my belt. So I knew which concepts were appealing to the people and which concepts were important to the people. But that had to do with the content, the style of the writing. I really was trying to target myself. Would Raj find this to be interesting, to be engaging, to be funny, to be logical, and so on? But in terms of the content, I vetted it in my class. So I guess, my situation is unique, right? I or at least different from most people's. Most people, I imagine, would be writing a book and just writing a book, right? Not really making presentations as much as I do because that's my job. I have to teach every day. So I can actually test out the content with my target audience and then use that experience to kind of inform what I put in the book, right? So I don't know if that.
Yeah, that's a great situation. And although people might not necessarily be teaching a course, I suspect some people listening to this will be, and others might be able to look at how they could create a situation, whether it's invite a group of beta readers or, maybe members of a book club that they're already in or something, and create that kind of community that gives them that real time, that real world feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've found, maybe this is just idiosyncratic to me, but I've found that actually kind of making a PowerPoint presentation on a topic is a great way to distill what's important and what's not and give the story a structure.
Yeah.
Because if you have to present this content, let's say a chapter's content in 20 minutes, through a PowerPoint presentation, that really forces you to think through, okay, what's going to be the beginning? What's going to be the motivating story, I say, to introduce the concept, and what's going to be the set of data that I provide to buttress or to show proof for the things that I'm saying, and then how do I want to end,
When you write, music or no music?
No music, no music, no distractions for me. I mean, I know that other people are different. Even if there's music playing, it can't have words. It has to be light volume in the background. But ideally, no music.
Do you like to write in a solitary manner, or do you like to be in a public place where there's activity, like a cafe or an airport or something? What's your preference?
So I prefer to be solitary. In fact, I prefer my desk right here. I can't even work that well at home, I feel. But having said that, sometimes I'm forced to write in an airport or, in a cafeteria or somewhere else, at a hotel lobby. And I've discovered that I've actually been quite impressed or, happy with how well I'm able to focus and zone in to my book. So I would say that now, because of, necessity is the mother of invention, they say. So I've been forced to work in those kind of circumstances, and I've discovered that I'm actually not bad at it. But my preference is to work from my desk.
Caffeine or no caffeine?
Caffeine, but not like huge amounts. Just 1 cup of coffee in the morning, and then maybe 1 midday, and that's it.
Very disciplined.
No, I mean, caffeine kind of makes me jittery after 3 cups. So just not a question of discipline. It's just.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. What's the best money you've ever spent as a writer?
That's a great question. What's the best money that I've ever spent? Okay, so I think I spent a significant amount, I would say, to the tune of about $5,000, just getting a person to read the book and give me kind of broad comments on just a lay person who's a good copy editor of sorts. And she was very good. And she gave me kind of broad comments on whether the thing was flowing well and everything.
How did you find her?
Trying to remember now. I think that one of my friends recommended her to me. So that was one. And the other thing that I think also was good is, we talked about this earlier, this paid forward thingy. So yeah. I bought a bunch of copies. I want to say 500 copies or something of my own book, just so that I could put in the seed number of books so that it could self-perpetuate. But I was the starting point. So that was that is a good amount to spend, or good expense.
What are the qualities of a great sentence, and how can we write more of them?
So I don't know if I can say that, just by looking at a sentence, you can say that it's a great sentence. I think it's context dependent. Sometimes just one word sentence can be a great sentence because it's come at the right time. And other times it needs to be a longer sentence and so on. But I would say that in general, if you want to kind of follow something, one of the things that Malcolm Gladwell said is that I've been told that I write in a way that even an 8th grader can understand really well. And I take that as a compliment, and I think that that's important. And that is, I think, one of the unique contributions of American writers, unlike the British, is that the British are more flowery and kind of, pompous, if that's the word, in how they write. And Americans, kind of made it so simple that anybody, even if somebody who's not very educated, but so long as they could read, could pick up a book and be entertained and engaged by it. And I like that, And I think for me, that's the important thing. Is it plain, simple English? Is it expressed in a way that it's in its simplest form? Or are you using words for the sake of kind of showing off your vocabulary? If it's the latter, then that's not good writing to me.
It was, to go back real quick, by the way, it was E.L. Doctorow who said, writing is like driving at night in the fog. You can only see as far as your headlights, but you can make the whole trip that way.
Yeah. That's good. That's awesome. Yeah.
Really appropriate. So what piece of technology has helped you in your writing that you wouldn't want to live without? I mean, of course, aside from the computer, right?
Yeah. So this, I don't know if you would consider this to be part of the technology, but, my smartphone and a specific kind of feature or app of the smartphone, which is the Notes app. What I do, like I said some time back, is that when I was writing the book, I was doing this obviously more often, but as soon as I got in touch with a concept, or heard a piece of news, or met somebody that was relevant to a certain chapter or a certain construct or concept, I would just make a note of that in my notes pages, and I'd have these different, the 7 habits and 7 sins and 7 exercises, and then under each of those headings, I'd just put a little bullet point saying that Brian Miller for this concept, and then also just to kind of make sure that I remembered why I put your name down, because a month later, sometimes you don't know why you put that down. So I just have a little small 3 or 4 word explanation for why. Okay, and I think that's awesome that we have that. That we are able to kind of for somebody who's very disorganized, like I am very disorganized. Without this technology, I think I would have been completely lost. I see some people kind of still carrying around notebooks and writing in notebooks, and they can manage that and they're good at it. I've never been that type, but because I have to carry my phone everywhere, just because I need to be in touch, and it comes with this notes pages, it really doubles up, and that part of technology is awesome.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's always with you. If you lost it, it's in the cloud, right? And we talk a lot, as we have in this conversation, about artificial intelligence, but I'm so interested in IA, intelligence amplification, and this is in a way, that kind of thing. It's beautiful. Okay, so last couple questions. One is, who is a teacher that has made a difference for you when it comes to writing, and what have you learned from them that others could maybe learn from them through you?
Mm-hmm. So this book, and if I write another book, I imagine that book would be in the genre of kind of researchers writing in a way that makes research findings accessible to the public, right? That genre, business, popular writing genre, whatever you want to call it. And in that space, now there's a lot of people, but 10, 15 years back, there weren't really a lot of people. I would say that Malcolm Gladwell perhaps started that whole genre at some level. Others would disagree and say maybe point out to somebody else who came before him, but he's not even an academic himself, right? But he writes in a way that takes some academic work and then translates it into language that most people find relatable to. But for me as an academic, I really looked up to Dan Ariely. I don't know if you've come across him. Or
Predictably Irrational.
Yeah. Honest Truth About Dishonesty. I still think that my book is nowhere close to his level of writing, and that's partly because I think he just has more interesting of his own experiments that he talks about. Okay, he mostly talks about his own stuff, whereas I just don't have that level of productivity that he has research wise to just focus on only my things, whereas he could. But he's just brilliant in terms of explaining concepts and being funny and just a great storyteller. So I like him a lot. I also love Adam Grant. Both Adam and Malcolm Gladwell, you brought up this Malcolm as an example of a guy who does that, right? The idea of knowing a lot of stories of the world that happen in the world, interesting stories that are very, very connected with the central point he wants to make. That marriage of those two things. It's not just random interesting stories. It's interesting stories that are relevant to the point he wants to make.
Yeah.
And that, when you read it, it sounds so beautiful and simple, right? Of course, this relates. But for him to be able to unearth those stories in the first place, and then be able to articulate those stories in a way that's simple to understand, and then connect it up to this piece of research, it's just brilliant, So those are my kind of writing heroes. I'd say that rather than read my book, I would say go and read those books. I've tried to kind of distill some of those in my own language, I would say, but I don't think I'm anywhere close to where they are. Yeah.
Well, I think you're pretty good. I mean, comparison is the thief of joy, as Roosevelt tells us. But for what it's worth.
No. I mean, I'm not comparing myself. Look, I mean, my aim is not to self-flagellate or anything of that sort. I'm just being honest about where I think I am and how their writing is, and not to say that I've not been authentic or that I can't improve. And it's possible that some people read my book and say, I actually prefer your writing, right?
I do. I think so. But that reminds me a couple years ago when the Lego movie came out and the trailer said, if you see one movie this summer, see Star Wars. But if you see two movies, see the Lego movie. So
Really? Okay. That's awesome.
all right, last question. I think this is my last question. I am interested actually in your rituals. So maybe two last questions. What rituals do you observe when it comes to writing or routines? Do you have any habits, anything that you do, before you sit down, as you sit down, after you sit, anything like that? Like light a candle, brew some tea, like wear your favorite slippers, something, anything at all like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think of my writing actually, any of my serious work. So the book I kind of, wrote a while back, but now, I'm working on my research papers and all that. That also involves a lot of writing, and sometimes it's data analysis or sitting down to formulate a questionnaire. Any of this stuff, I would say that, this is not directly rituals, but it's very important for me to have a lifestyle that is conducive for that. We've already talked about it, this healthy lifestyle and so on. But more narrowly, when it comes to the actual work, are there some rituals? Yes, I think that for me, I find myself in a good headspace, wanting to do this kind of stuff better when I'm at my desk at my office as opposed to somewhere else. Okay.
Yeah.
So I don't know. Again, this is not exactly a ritual, but rather than working somewhere else, I just come here and then I close my door. I switch off all my smartphone and email. I close it so that I don't have any disruptions. Basically, okay. The reason I close my door too, which is a little bit antisocial, I suppose, but it's because I don't want people to kind of just walk in and start engaging me in a conversation when I'm deep in a flow of a certain task. It's very disruptive for me, and I find it takes some time for me to jumpstart myself up. Okay, but what I do then is I kind of take mini breaks at points that I feel like I need to reward myself because I've kind of finished one cycle or come to a logical point of taking a break. And those breaks and the rewards I give myself, which could be like a small cup of coffee or going and chatting with a colleague if they're up for it, things like that, or going and eating a little donut, whatever. Right? Rarely do that now, but so those breaks are kind of weaved in as just ways of kind of like refreshing myself, but also giving myself a little bit of a reward. Okay, so those I would say are the kind of rituals to the extent that you count them as rituals. But otherwise, I do not have a whole lot.
What's your relationship with procrastination, and how do you overcome it, or how do you avoid it if you do?
Mm-hmm. So everybody procrastinates, right? Even like I was talking about Dan Ariely, who's like extremely productive on multiple dimensions. Writing books and writing articles and giving talks and so on. And he procrastinates, he says. So everybody does. I know that I do. I it's not the case that I don't. But what I've discovered is that if I have a bunch of things on my list, right? I have a very active things to do list, and I maintain it very, very, diligently. I try and block this 9 to 12 time in the morning for my important stuff. Okay, but sometimes I don't feel like doing it. I don't feel like writing. Okay, and I'll still give it a try. I'll give it a shot, and there'll be occasionally, maybe 5% of the time, when I just feel like no, this is just not going anywhere. Right? Then I'll just go to other items on my things to do list. Okay, and I'll pick some items that are pleasant, that I feel emotionally positive about. Like, for example, booking an air ticket for a travel from here to Costa Rica with my family or whatever. They're just all the images associated with it and the fun we're going to have. It's a pleasant task. And then at the end of that cycle, I'll go take a break and come back, and then I'll get back to the work. So I'll just try and see if that taking that mini break, doing that positive thing, has re-energized me to coming back and doing this. And if everything else fails, what I've discovered is that if I just go to the gym and I come back, I feel really good at the end of a gym workout. That's one of my most reliable mood boosters is to just go for a run or a workout. Okay. Never felt worse after a workout. I should put it this way, that I've never not felt better after a workout than before a workout. It's like remarkable. 100% of the time, I go into the gym, I come out feeling good.
Yeah.
So
Smart.
that's what I do.
That's smart. Okay, so last question. What advice, encouragement, inspiration would you give to the people listening who are either, what I would say, stuck, on the threshold of beginning a project, or maybe in some ways even worse, they're in the belly of the snake. They're in the tunnel, and they haven't managed to get this over the finish line. What do you say to someone like that to help them not only keep going, but to get it done and get it out into the world and make the difference that they want to make?
Mm-hmm. So I have different pieces of advice or suggestions for people who are yet to begin and people who are in the belly, as you put it. For people who are yet to begin, what I've discovered oftentimes is that I've talked to a lot of people who want to write books and all that, is that they have a fear of failure. And the fear of failure, it comes from having unreasonably high expectations of what they want the book to be. They're already imagining that the book needs to be a bestseller, or, it's like a really kind of one of its kind of a book that, everybody reads it and is wowed by and so on. I think that you need to kind of just start, right? Just start with something and just put pen to paper, just sit down and write one page. That's it. Don't kind of try to imagine the final product and say that this is how great it's going to be and so on. That puts extra pressure on you, and you don't want that right now. Okay. All you want to do is to see what are the set of things that you want to say, and do they make sense? And, is it kind of in the ballpark of what you intended to say? Is that being translated when you put these words on the paper? That's for people starting out. For people in the belly, the dark night, so to speak, right? I would say that look, there are many different ways of motivating yourself in that squishy middle part. Often it's very easy to begin. You're enthusiastic, and then when you come towards the end, again, it's easy to finish up often, but it's the middle stages that you get really stuck. Okay, and I would say that there are many different ways to motivate yourself in that stage. And one of the ways to motivate yourself is to basically tell yourself that, look, I'm just going to come in, and every day from 9 to 12, I'm going to do this, and nothing else matters during this time, that I have to focus on this book, and that's it. Okay, and I can kind of party, I can do other things, I can give myself rewards, but 9 to 12, I'm going to focus on this book. Okay, that's how it's going to be. And even if I waste time there, I feel like it's wasted time. Even if I don't feel like I'm progressing, I'm just going to do it. And I'm not going to evaluate how successful I am for the next month. At the end of it, I'm going to look back and see what came out of it. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it is to just ask for feedback from other people. Okay, just contact your friends or well-wishers and tell them that, look, I'm in this stage, kind of halfway done, and I don't know how good it is, and I just need some advice and need some suggestions on ways I could improve this. So do you mind just giving it a read and telling me what works and what doesn't? And usually that does the trick, because if they are really well-wishers, they'll probably say something positive, but they'll also say something useful, and then those will give you new kind of beginnings and new sparks of inspiration for you to kind of restart the whole process. Yeah. Those are two things that you could do.
What I love about that is that at some point, readers will engage with the material. So this concept of bringing them into the process a little earlier is a way of stimulating progress. That's a great concept. Yeah. I'm sure I'll think of the 6 most brilliant questions as soon as we disconnect, but this was wonderful. And I really appreciate you making so much time to talk with me and to share your experience and your knowledge with me and everybody who's listening. So thank you.
No, absolutely, Brian.
Despite living in an age where we have more comforts and conveniences than ever before, life isn't working for many people. Whether it's in the developed world, where we're dealing with depression, anxiety, addiction, divorce, jobs we hate, relationships that don't work, or people in the developing world who don't have access to clean water or sanitation or healthcare or education, or who live in conflict zones, there's a lot of people on the planet that life isn't working very well for. If you're one of those people, I invite you to connect with me at goodliving.com. I've created Life's Best Practices Breakthrough Coaching to help you navigate the transitions that we all go through. Whether you've just graduated school, you're going through a divorce, you just got married, you're headed into retirement, you're starting a business, you just lost your job, whatever it is you're facing, I've developed a 36-week course that you go through with me and a community of achievers and seekers who are committed to improving their own lives and the lives of others. So through this online program, you will have the opportunity to go deep into every area of your life, explore life's big questions, create answers for yourself in community, get clarity and accountability. If that's something you're interested to learn about, I invite you to contact me directly at brian@brianmiller.com or by visiting goodliving.com.